Okay, so we'll walk through the basics of our starter application. A lot of times when you put together a new JavaScript application, particularly when you pick a technology like React, you're expected to kind of piece together everything that you need to build a successful application. This is a little different than what we've dealt with in the past with other frameworks. For example, Ruby on Rails, everything is kind of done for you when you generate a Rails application, all the way down to it has all the testing facilities built in. And as part of the project generation process, you can pick your different testing packages. With JavaScript, it's a little bit different. There are tools like Yeoman, however you say it, that will allow you to generate projects. However, what I see more and more are these starter applications, and React has a lot of starter applications. We've customized this, or rather built this one, for our particular needs. So I wanted to walk through the basics of this starter application. The place that's probably easiest to start is that, just to go with an overview of all the different pieces that this uses. So we have Karma for tests. You can see the Karma configuration file right here. We're using Gulp right now, although we're moving more and more away from Gulp. Right now, the only thing Gulp is really used for is to build our HTML files, which live in this HTML directory. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. We use React. We also use Redux. And then we use a couple of different tools that plug in and make those libraries a little bit easier to use, including the React Router and React Redux. So if you look at the project, there's not a lot in the root directory. We have a .env file that allows you to configure environment settings for a given developer's machine. There's an example file that'll show you which pieces that you need to set up to make that run. There's also this package.json, which doesn't really contain a whole lot of stuff other than it's nice to have a package.json in the root of the project so you don't always have to drop in the client directory to run stuff. You'll notice that our package has this scripts right here declared. So there's a build. So if I run npm run build on the command line, and we can do that. Let's see, we have client starter out. If I just do npm run build, that will build a release version of the project. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger. Okay, so you can see that it's actually building the project, which outputs the results into this prod directory over here. And now you can see there's our Webpack bundle that's been constructed. Here's our images that have been renamed. We did a little bit of training and talked about the context module in Webpack and how it generates these files. Well, how it generates the image files. You can also run release. If you do npm run hot in this particular project, that's what starts up the server. So you can see I've done that right here. Npm run hot starts up a local server on 8080, which is the default. That can be changed in the .env file. So now here's the project up and running. Refresh that and show that it is really running. If you do npm run test, that you can see all of these just move into the client directory and run the scripts from inside the client directory. So I'll show that here. There's just one other piece that might be worth showing off, which is this S3 website push. So right now this project is using the S3 website gem, so you do need to have Ruby installed and install that one gem if you want to use the deploy capabilities that come with the application. If you fill out the S3 website YAML with your ID, secret bucket, etc., then you can just do, let's see right here, this S3 website push, and that will deploy this as a working application onto S3. there's also a script, and if you look at the README, it talks about how to do all this stuff. There's a script that will create the website for you right here. Then you log in. You have to set up a user using IAM. So here's the IAM policy that you'd set up. You will have to change the React Client Starter app to whatever the domain is that you're going to use. Then you do this S3 website config apply. That will change the bucket into a website. And then after that, the only thing you have to do is type in npm run deploy, and it will run the script, right? Or run release, sorry, not deploy, npm run release. That will build the code, and then it will push it up to that website. So the deploy process is relatively simple once you get everything set up. Okay, so let's take a look at this client directory. This is where all the code lives. Take a look at this package directory right here. We've got a number of different dependencies. You can see that we use Babel. Right now it's Babel version 5. We'll upgrade it to 6 here sometime soon. History is used by the React router. We're using a mutable for our data store. We use that in conjunction with Redux. So you can see we have React Redux as well as Redux. We use the Redux simple router. We use Super Agent to handle our API requests. And then here's a bunch of dev dependencies. You can see we're using Karma, we're using Gulp, some different dev tools, and of course we're using Webpack. Okay. So now digging down in, we have these configuration files. You can see we have Webpack hot, Webpack release, Webpack test. So when you type npm run hot, this is the file that's used to start up this local Webpack dev server. It pulls all of its configuration from Webpack config and basically just starts up a local server that handles the hot reload. Release is even simpler. It just says release is true and feeds that into the Webpack config and then exports that. This is used during the build process, so you can pull up this file and it will have all of the settings required to basically release to production. And then tests, this is our test configuration. Here's your Karma configuration. This is a file that's required by Karma. We use Webpack in conjunction with Karma so that our tests look exactly like our deployed code. And I can go into the directory here and just do npm, npm run test. And that's going to start up Karma. Give it just a second here. So you can see our tests are all passing, and if I can get this, there we go. Karma runs in a web browser, runs in Chrome in this case. We can actually run it in Firefox or any other browser that we want. This is really nice because if I need to debug the code, I can hit that debug button. Gives you a blank page, but if you do an inspect, then you can bring up your sources, and like I can go look for one of the tests that I wrote. So here's one of the tests that we talked about yesterday. It's this assets specification, which just tests to make sure our new assets functionality is working correctly. So you can actually put breakpoints in there, just refresh the page, it'll hit that breakpoint, and then you can examine the values using the console. So now I can come down here in the console, and you can see I assigned this variable JPG to be something, so I can now inspect that and say, oh, that's the value that I expect. I can also do things down here. So if I want to execute code, oops, I can do that. It'll execute whatever JavaScript you'd like. All right, so the starter app has all of the testing capabilities built in. You don't have to worry about how do I set all that up. There's a fair amount of configuration that's gone into this. We're also using Jasmine for our tests. That's the testing framework that we chose to use. So the whole purpose of this application is to bring together kind of best of breed tools into one spot, get all the configuration done, and then you never have to do it again. Over time, we make some small adjustments, but hopefully everything that you need to build an application is here. So at the end of the day, most of the work that we do is going to be in this JS file. So you can see we've got the JS directory. Everything starts with app.jsx. So you can see here, again, this is code that most of the time we won't need to change. This just fires up the application, as it were. It has the Babel core polyfill, includes React and React DOM. We bring in the provider from React Redux, and we use all of these to set up the store. So right here is the one store. Whenever you deal with Redux, you only have one store. This configure store method that we import is what sets that up. And we feed it some initial settings that are provided from window.default settings. So if you remember, I said we talked a little bit about the HTML directory, so I'm going to pause right here to talk about that. And that's where the default settings come from. So if we go look at the HTML directory right here, there's this index.tpl.html. The TPL means that it's going to be a template. So the Jolt process will look for these includes and then go grab the header HTML and the Google Analytics HTML and inject them right here. It just allows us a little bit of reuse across our HTML files. We'll probably do a little bit of refactor on this going forward, but for right now this works. A couple of things to note about the HTML file. One is this app webpack bundle.js entry right here. That works great as long as you are in development mode. But remember, when we build for production, it changes the names. And we change the names to include the hash for that specific file so that we can better handle caching. So the browsers will cache by name. If we always said the name of this file is app webpack bundle.js, the browsers would cache that. We would make updates and the browsers would say, oh, I already have this file, I don't need to make an update. So if you include a hash in the file name, then when the file actually changes, that hash will change. And then we provide that name in place of this name to the browser so that it will know that it needs to go get the new JavaScript file. The way that this works is inside of this Jolt file, we have this task right here for HTML. And this will look at the Webpack stats file. When Webpack does its build process, it generates a stats file that has information about its output. And one of the things that gets entered is the name for this JavaScript file. So we then loop through those names right here, pull out that entry, and then replace this app webpack bundle.js with this new name. So if you look at this index that's been built, it's a little bit hard to read because it also takes out all the white space, but there it is right there. We've changed the name to the built and hashed version of the file. So all of that is just going to happen for you when you type npm run release. Also, if you type npm run hot, it will build these HTML files for you as well. So you can see right here it's injected the Google Analytics code, for example. All right, so then going back to our code, we have this window default settings. If you remember in that HTML, here's window default settings. And we've just put a bogus entry, just user ID 0 in there for right now, kind of as a placeholder. If all you're doing is building a client-side application, then this default settings is probably always going to just be empty. However, we integrate this with some of our other projects where the index file is generated dynamically by the server. So then we are able to inject perhaps the currently logged in user's ID, or we can add some account information, we can add profile information. Whatever needs to be provided by the server can be provided in this default settings, and then that's going to be sent down to the client. App.jsx is going to pick that up, and it's going to stick it into the store underneath settings, and then that will be available for any other components that need it, or in particular, the API layer frequently uses it so that it can figure out what the URLs it needs to call back to are. Okay, so I think I might stop here. Well, not quite. Look, this app.jsx is kind of where everything gets kicked off. It brings in the router. So you can see we have our routes defined here. So now if I go into my routes, this is where our components actually get linked to URLs. So we have this top level index component. If I go into components, you'll be able to see, let's see if it's in layout. Right here. So here's an index component. It uses the React Redux connect method. Really, it doesn't do much. This would be a file where you're going to put your Chrome. We fully expect that any of our projects that use this will probably delete some of this code and replace it with something more useful. So at the very root of the application is the index. Inside of index, you can see we render this.props.children. So going back to the routes, this index route is what's going to get rendered into the this.props.children because it is a child of this component right here. And we tell it to render the home component. So we've imported the home component from components home. Your routes file is going to consist of importing all of your top level components, all of the components that can be routed to, and the paths required to get to those locations. So by default, because this is index route, it will render underneath this guy because nothing else is here. So home.jsx is what gets rendered. You can see we're just rendering this one JPEG. We are using this assets functionality that we've added to find that JPEG. And then you can see, of course, right here, that that's what gets rendered. Now if I switch back over here and I say, no, I want to render the PNG, and then I save that, I toggle back over the browser, the hot reload has picked up my change, and there's the PNG, which happens to be the big file. Or I could change it. I think we've got an SVG sitting in that directory as well, and there's the SVG. All right. Does all that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to stop here, and then we can talk more about how the router works. In another recording, we'll talk more about how to construct components, and we're going to talk more about Redux. But hopefully that provides a pretty good broad overview of the starter application.